pleasant day to everyone. We, the third group, shall discuss the analysis of statements and types of knowledge claim by Andresito Acuña. Let's start with the Module 1, with the 5 classification of sentences that include interrogative, imperative, exclamatory, explanative, and declarative.
For interrogative sentences, these are used to ask questions and seek information. They don't make assertions or denials and therefore do not have truth values because they are not making claims about the world. Second is imperative sentences. These are commands or requests. Like interrogative sentences, they do not assert or deny anything and thus they lack truth values.
Exclamatory sentences. These express strong emotions or exclamations. Similar to interrogative and imperative sentences, they do not assert or deny facts and do not have truth values. Expletive sentences often contain exclamatory words or phrases and are used to convey strong feelings. They too do not assert or deny propositions and lack truth values. For example, we can use interrogative as, "What is my grade in Philosophy 1?" In imperative, we can use, "Shut the door." In exclamatory, "This is good." For expletive, one can say, "I hope to graduate in UP." For declarative, another one is, "I am a student in UP Dep."
Wittgenstein stated, but how many kinds of sentences are there? Say assertion, question, and command. There are countless different kinds of use of what we call symbols, words, and sentences. And the multiplicity is not something fixed, given once and for all, but new types of language, new language games, as we may say, some come into existence, and others become obsolete and get forgotten. The term language game meant to bring prominence the fact that speaking of language is part of an activity, a form of life. Language is described as a dynamic and evolving system with new types of language and language games emerging over time. The term language game is introduced to highlight that talking about language is intertwined with human activities and forms of life.
We can say the passage suggests that language is not static, but constantly changing, with some language forms becoming obsolete and forgotten while new ones emerge. The linguistic behavior of knowledge claims is often called a proposition or a statement in the current linguistic convention.
Interrogative, imperative, exclamatory, and expletive sentences are just merely uttered. They don't have truth values because nothing was asserted nor denied. Declarative sentence could be used to assert or deny something in the world that can be either true or false. With this, a sentence was used to assert a knowledge claim. In sentence and statement, both concepts and statements are constructs. In this context, constructs means that they are human-made or mental representations. Concepts are abstract ideas or categories, while statements are linguistic expressions of those concepts.
The distinction between sentences and statements is that a sentence itself is not the identity that can be true or false. Instead, it is the statement expressed by the sentence that can have a truth value. In other words, sentences are vehicles for conveying statements, concepts, or ideas.
Truth and falsehood are described as properties of statements or propositions. When a sentence is used to convey a statement, it can be evaluated for its truth or falsehood. This evaluation depends on whether the statement accurately represents reality or does not. A single sentence can sometimes contain multiple statements or knowledge claims. This complexity arises because sentences can be structured in ways that convey multiple pieces of information or make several assertions. As a result, the truth or falsehood of a sentence may depend on the combined truth or falsehood of its constituent statements.
Let us proceed to the principles governing the analysis of the truth. Let us proceed to the 3 principles governing the analysis of the truth value of statements. Principle of identity is the truth value of a statement is stable over time. If a statement is true, then it is true. If a statement is false, then it is false. applicable only to a world that is constant, regular, and unchanging.
The principle of non-contradiction is a statement cannot be both true and false at the same time and in the same respect. An example of this is the knowledge claim being the blackboard is green. On the other hand, the contradictory claim is the blackboard is not green. When one claim is true, then the other is always false and vice versa. This is often confused with the concept of inconsistency.
The concept of inconsistency example is the blackboard is green is inconsistent with many statements like the blackboard is yellow. Both statements can be false, but both can be true. The principle of excluded middle is a statement that can only have truth values, either it is true or it is false and nothing else. Probability is excluded. This does not apply to some symbolic systems, e.g. statistics and empirical statements.
Let us proceed to logical positivism. Its definition is a philosophical movement in the early 20th century that aimed to understand and evaluate knowledge through empirical evidence and logical analysis, rejecting metaphysical and non-empirical claims. Also known as logical empiricism, its scientific knowledge is the only kind of factual knowledge, and that all traditional metaphysical doctrines are to be rejected as meaningless. To further understand this topic, let us watch this video.
What is logical positivism? Logical positivism is the direct result of the revision of positivism through the years. As we may already know, the positivism of Auguste Comte and Ernst Mach dealt only with the phenomena that are directly observable. By the early 20th century, this position was viewed as unrealistic by many scholars. Scientists during the early 20th century had made major studies on theoretical concepts that are not directly observable, such as gravity, magnetism, atoms, force, and electrons. Hence, scholars had to find a way for science to account for these entities through the employment of a theory without running the risk of falling into the pit of metaphysical speculation. The solution to this problem was provided by logical positivism. The logical positivists then divided science into two major parts, namely the empirical and the theoretical. Thus, logical positivism wedded together empiricism and rationalism. Here, the observable aspect of science refers to empirical events, while the theoretical aspect attempts to explain that which is observed. However, it must be noted that the logical positivists did not undermine the importance of empirical observation. As a matter of fact, the ultimate authority for the logical positivists is empirical observation, and theories are considered useful only if they help explain what is observed. As is well known, logical positivism was a view of science developed by the Vienna Circle around 1924. The philosophers of the Vienna Circle combined the positivism of Comte and Mach with the rigors of formal logic. For these philosophers, abstract theoretical concepts were allowed only if such terms can be logically tied to empirical observations. With this, an operational definition of logical positivism is arrived at. The philosophy of science, according to which theoretical concepts are admissible if they are tied to the observable world through operational definition.
The theory of knowledge is developed by the logical positivists led by Moritz Schlick. The theory accepted David Hume's epistemological framework that stated the two sources of knowledge. The first is reason, which is formal knowledge And an example of this is logics, math, and geometry. Second and last is the sense perception, which is the empirical knowledge from the five senses.
To dig deeper in this topic, the theory of knowledge can have multiple parts. Verification principle. A statement is meaningful only if it can be empirically verified or is logically necessary. Empiricism. Schlick emphasized the significance of sensory experience and empirical observations as the foundation of knowledge.
Anti-metaphysical stance. Schlick rejected metaphysical or philosophical claims that couldn't be empirically verified. Logical analysis. Schlick also emphasized the role of logical analysis in clarifying language and concepts.
There are two sources of knowledge: analytic statements and empirical statements. Analytic statements are used to claim a formal knowledge. Example is the square of a hypotenuse is equal to the square of two sides. Empirical statements are used to claim an empirical knowledge, such as the sun will rise tomorrow.
Ideas, according to Hume, can be known intuitively or demonstratively. For example, the proposition, all triangles have three angles, is an example of a proposition that can be known intuitively. The proposition, the sum total of all three angles in a right triangle is equal to 180 degrees, is an example of a proposition that can be known demonstratively. It is important to note that, in relations of ideas, the truth can be established without empirical evidence. In fact, in both examples mentioned, we don't need to resort to experience before we can truly say that all triangles have three angles, or indeed, the sum total of all three angles in a right triangle is equal to 180 degrees. Through mental processes alone, we can truly say that indeed the propositions mentioned are absolutely true. Now, matters of fact, according to Hume, are propositions whose truth can be discovered through experience alone. Consider, for example, the proposition, sugar is sweet. Obviously, one cannot really say that indeed sugar is sweet if one has not tasted it. Hence, we can never come to know that sugar is sweet without resorting to experience. Now, it must be noted that it is matters of fact that concerns Hume. And so Hume asks, what is the nature of the empirical evidence which assures us of any real existence of matters of fact? Well, according to Hume, we are assured of some facts by the present testimony of our senses or by the records of our memory. In other words, for Hume, we know that facts exist in reality simply because we experience them. And this explains why Hume was an empiricist. But the question is, by what means do we get beyond such facts? In other words, how can we be sure that such facts exist in reality? This is the central question in Hume's theory of knowledge, which he developed in his famous work, Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. So again, by what means do we get beyond such facts? According to Hume, it is by means of the relation of cause and effect that we are enabled to make, more or less reasonable, predictions and conjectures that go beyond the data of perception and memory. But how do we arrive at the knowledge of cause and effect? The answer for Hume is not reasoning a priori, as the rationalists would have us believe, but entirely from experience. Again, for Hume, our knowledge of cause and effect relation remains limited to experience. Of course, the mind steps beyond experience and engages in reasoning. But for Hume, this kind of reasoning is not supported by any argument or process of understanding through relations of ideas or through reasoning a priori. This kind of reasoning, for Hume, is supported by habit or custom. Now, it must be noted that for the rationalists, cause and effect relation falls under a priori reasoning. In other words, for the rationalists, there is a necessary connection between cause and effect. For example, if it is raining at the moment, then reason tells us that the road must be wet. However, for Hume, in reality, there is no necessary connection between two events, between cause and effect. The idea of a necessary connection is produced in the mind not through reason a priori, but through habit or custom. Hence, Hume did not reject the idea of connection wholesale. He only rejects the idea of connection employed in the metaphysical reasoning, that is, the a priori reasoning in rationalism. Again, for Hume, there is necessary connection only through experience, in common life and practice, which is based on habit. Hence, the only evidence assuring us of any real existence in matters of fact is experience. That is, the present testimony of our senses, the records of our memory, and the causal reasoning based on the empirically observed regularities of past experience. As Hume writes, knowledge of reality can only be derived from a careful observation of the constant conjunction between contingent events. Where such constant conjunction is observed, we are inclined to attribute a causal relationship between events designated as cause and effect.
There are also two theories of truth according to David Hume's dichotomy between relations of ideas and matters of fact. Number one is the relations of ideas, or priori claim. These are analytic claims, and to deny it would simply imply a contradiction. Second is matters of fact, or posteriori claim. These are empirical claims, experiences in the world, and to deny it does not imply a contradiction. There is the coherence theory of truth that is used to verify empirical claims through the faculty of reason. An example of this is the sentence, two parallel lines will not meet. This is a logical coherence with the well-formed formula, or WFF, of geometry. Then there is the correspondence theory of truth that is used to verify analytic claims through the five senses. My classmates are noisy. This is an example of correspondence with direct observation.
Empirical claims are based on observation or experience rather than theory or pure logic. Example of this is I am attentive today. It's an example of correspondence theory of truth using the five senses. Analytic claims are true because of what they mean and because of the way the world is, whereas analytic truths are the true in nature of meaning alone. Example is snow is white and all bachelors are unmarried.
How do we verify the truth of such statements? Coherence theory with the convention of a linguistic system. Analytic statement of this sort, when determined to be true by coherence theory, means that the denial of the statement is always false without further investigation. An example of this is the opposite sentence of the earlier example is all bachelors are not unmarried.
The paradigm of analytic statements come from formal systems like mathematics and logic. Example, 5 plus 7 is equals to 12. The truth depends on its coherence with the arithmetical system, where it is as well-formed formula, or the WWF. Another example is, two lines that does not meet are called parallel lines. The laws and theorems of algebra and geometry are members of the class of analytic statements, technically known as the well-formed formula.
How many types of meaningful statements are there? Logical positivists stated that there are only two meaningful statements corresponding to two types of knowledge claims, empirical and analytic, but philosophers disagree with this. Lastly, status of evaluative claims, your judgment about the value or disvalue, the positive or negative worth of an act, behavior, object, or event. According to Hume, sources of judgment, passions, and emotions. An example of this is sex without love is immoral. This is a religious statement.
The proscriptive form. It includes, you should practice what you preach. Sex education should be taught in school. Study your lessons every day. And for the next one is the proscriptive form. It has, do not cheat in the exam. Do not forget to pay your bills. You're not required to obey an immoral order. That is all for our topics. Thank you for listening. I am Franz Limson.
And I'm Julia Pulumbarit.
Have a nice day.